is Coco Madari. I am here with Rebecca Quave. And last week when we did our live stream together, we talked about love and the revolution, how love is the key to how we can make the revolution happen, how we can make our activist dreams come true, how we can create the world that we want to create. And it's all about being aware of the love that is available to you and embracing all of yourself, including all of your emotions, with love. So we talked about that last week. If you missed it, it is on Rebecca's profile. It's on my profile. It's on my podcast, Do Epic Shit. And that's on Spotify. So if you haven't seen that, or haven't listened to that, then definitely check it out. And this week, we're going to be diving a little bit deeper into anger, specifically me and Rebecca's personal stories about anger, and how stories about when anger was a catalyst for like really amazing growth, and for me, like money and business success and stuff like that. And also how when anger was something that held us back and limited us. Because last week we ended up talking about anger a lot because we were talking about activism and all of that kind of stuff. So we wanted to dive even deeper. Do you have anything to add, Rebecca?
Yeah, so you're right. We did. It sort of like took on a life of its own last week. And so it's a really good topic to dive into even more deeply, because it's something that has a lot of heat for people, right? And especially people who have been socialized and conditioned as women, that it gets very sticky, right? There's a lot of, especially as you go back a few generations, right? Women were very much taught that what they needed to be was demure and sweet and accommodating and lovely and all of these things, but anger is something that arises in anyone, in everyone,
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm thinking we can just take turns on like whatever topic we're going to go on. So maybe, do you want to first, Rebecca, tell a story about a time when you felt anger and it limited you in some way, like it wasn't an expansive experience?
Yeah. So that is sort of like the story of me from birth to 30, right?
Mm.
Was anger holding me back. I was known for having a really bad temper. I would do my best to suppress it as much as I could, which meant that then it would build up and then it would explode in tantrums. So obviously that looked different ways as I went through different ages, right? So when I was really young, that looked like like my grandmother getting me out of the tub at 3 or 4 years old, and for whatever reason I didn't want to wear what she was going to put on me, and me having such a tantrum that I ripped this brand new dress like apart, right?
Mhm.
So or it looked like in adulthood, always having to buy a new phone, because, and I don't mean cell phone, this was like kind of pre-cell phone, but just like, your landline phone, because the minute I was a thrower in general. So when somebody said something that I didn't like, there went the phone, it would split into pieces. I have to get a new phone. A big back and forth that my ex-husband and I would have about that was, I would get angry, I would throw something, and he was like, you cannot do this, you have to stop. And I agreed, right? I didn't like living that way. And I remember one day that because I had long agreed, I had like made a sworn vow, I will not throw anything. But here's the difference between change that
I didn't
happens.
know you were a thrower.
I'm a former thrower.
Oh my gosh.
It was just like I said, it was just part of like the tantrum package. It was just one
Mhm,
element of
mhm.
like the stuffed anger extraordinaire, buffet. So the difference between when your behavior changes organically because there's been a lasting shift in you, and when you're trying to force your behavior to change, right? And so
Mm,
this is a great example of that, because when I
yeah.
tried to force my behavior to change just because I could see rationally, like, I don't want to be this person, he's right, I don't like it. There's this I mean, looking back now, it's this comical moment where I was just frozen like this with a cup in my hand, like just not just shaking, right? To hold myself back from throwing this cup across the room. And he goes, "Don't wield that at me." And I was like, "You said I couldn't throw. I swore not to throw. You can't take wielding from me. You cannot take, like, if I can't throw, I have to at least be able to wield." And he was like, That's crazy." And the reason for it again was because I hadn't actually resolved the anger. Right? So I was still in the exact same pattern emotionally, where there was all of this anger that needed space to arise. I was constantly shoving it down until it would just come bursting through and have to have space. And so by trying to change my behavior by force, even with my best intentions, even knowing rationally that this was something I didn't want to do, it came up anyway. Whereas for the past, I don't know, 20 years now, I haven't even had the urge to even wield something, let alone throw something, right? And it's just been naturally that way because my relationship with my emotions changed. So my relationship with anger changed. And so instead of having to try to force myself to get my behavior to change, the behavior took care of itself because the relationship with the emotions was completely different.
Mhm, mhm. Do you wanna expand on that?
On what part? How?
Your relationship with your emotions, how that changed?
Oh yeah. So the relationship with the emotions changed from being like afraid of them, trying to separate myself from them all the time, getting overwhelmed by them, basically not knowing what to do with them. Basically, they were running me, right? Rather than being in a really harmonious, loving flow with them, where they're all welcome, they're all allowed. I love them all because I fell into this deep love and peace with myself. And then that includes every emotion that could possibly arise naturally by default, right? You can't fully truly love yourself and fully truly be at peace with yourself without that including everything you could possibly experience, every emotion that you could possibly have.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
That's such the key part, like, knowing what to do with your emotions.
yeah,
Because I've learned over the years in, like, self-development, therapy, coaching and stuff, lots of different ways to deal with your emotions. But I think the problem becomes when we use those tools in order to change our emotions or to, like, get rid of them or to feel better.
exactly. Because
Yeah.
all of those coping mechanisms are all built still on the assumption that there's something wrong about the emotion, right?
Yeah.
They're all built on the belief that, and this is why, I love to say that one of the things I help people with is freeing themselves from the self-improvement trap, because
Mm.
just you end up with more layers of judgment and suppression and separation, when then you're like, oh well, I have ways that I can manage this. And then you wonder what's wrong when, like, what you thought was your foolproof way fails. So it's not even about like
Yeah.
some little trick up your sleeve so much as that relationship with the emotions fundamentally shifting
Yeah,
permanently.
and one thing that has really shifted for me with your work is, when the emotions come, it's that they're bringing you a gift. They're bringing you some sort of insight or deepening into love. And that way it's not about like, oh, now I feel bad, now it's time to sit down and close your eyes and breathe and whatever, right? It's about like a free flow of emotions throughout the day, and having just that open and welcoming relationship with them. And this is something that I have taught for a while now, but I love with your work, it's deepened a lot, is that relationship with allowing those emotions is super related to allowing money to come in, right? It's being open. That's what it is.
Yeah.
And something that I've learned a lot in this past year, having cash flow problems in my business and stuff like that, is the practice of being open to all of the emotions that whatever problems you have are coming with, and being open to money flowing into you in all different ways. Like throughout the past year, there have been money opportunities coming to me that I didn't even know existed, and probably didn't exist before. Like like there are, and this is so important, like there are money opportunities for you guys that don't exist right now, like that people don't know about, because money is meant to flow to you in your unique specific way. And if you're open to that, even like during the day, and being open to new ideas, being open to different ways that money can flow,
Exactly. And I love that you mentioned that,
Yeah.
because that's what is expansive and that's what is creative. Because when we try to just duplicate some sort of like cookie cutter thing, we end up with stuff like, I was just talking to my son earlier today about this, of, I saw a post yesterday that was somebody actually bragging about buying a storage unit in a place in a small town where there's no storage units for like 50 miles around or something, right?
Yeah.
And hiking up the rent like ridiculously, doubling the rent or something, and getting cussed out by a bunch of the existing tenants who then left. But now a year later, it's at 100% capacity. Like that, as if that was a flex, right? To have gone in and done this kind of manipulative thing. And it made me think about a lot of what's been pushed to people in recent decades of like, real estate acquisition and, buying up things to then do them as Airbnbs and stuff that is not sustainable and not community focused at all, right? Stuff that is just fear and greed based ways to, oh, here, I did this, but it's a process, like a piece of machinery, and I'll teach you to do the same thing.
Yeah.
Rather than
Push
people
these buttons.
exactly, instead of people being peaceful enough and in love enough and courageous and in tune with their own creativity enough to be willing to surrender into exactly what you pointed to, which is there's unique ways that are exact to you. There's something, and like we talked about last week, there's your particular note that has to exist in this symphony. And it's not, and that's what you're going to be rewarded for, is your exact note, not some cockamamie, greed thing.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, even just the other day, I went to the art store down the street because I'm looking to get art supplies. And I was just, chatting with the owner, and she lives downtown just like me. There's like stabbings, happening. There's gang stuff. And so we were just like chatting about it. And like there ended up being like a potential opportunity for me to like work in exchange for art supplies, or like have some sort of other kind of thing. She was like, if you ever really need anything, like just let me know, and then we'll see like what we can work out. And that is just an example of like, even though there wasn't actual cash exchange or anything, that's still a money opportunity.
Exactly.
And it's so important that we track those things in our own brains of like, where are we like getting a break? Like I got this recliner for free when I was working at Lazy Boy, and like, I didn't get it from the employer. I got it from Facebook Marketplace, this is like their best recliner, leather, in the exact color that I wanted. Like, it's just, you know, yeah, being open, and there's a direct correlation with being open to money and being open to your feelings.
Exactly. Yeah, because and it's as simple as you're either open or you're not, right? And so some people say that they're trying to be open, and what they're being open to is, well, I would like this, this, and this to come to me immediately. I would like to feel happiness, joy, relief, satisfaction, whatever, and saying, okay, so now I'm open. Why isn't
Yeah.
anything happening?
Yeah.
And meanwhile, open means truly open, meaning I am open to the joy, the sadness, the everything, right?
Mhm.
And the beautiful thing, and I've watched this with myself, and I've watched it with just clients for years and years from all over the world, when they get really open to what they thought they needed to avoid, to what they thought they needed to reject and run from and like keep pushed in the corner, what they didn't even realize was how much more love and joy and peace and just ecstatic delight they had also closed themselves off to,
Mhm.
right? Because everybody thinks that they're not, oh, well, I'm not closed to that. I'm definitely, give me more of that. I'm open to that. But to the degree that you are not open to the things that you think are, and uncomfortable, to that degree, you're also not open to the things that you say you would like to experience.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So let me
So
share one of my
what is your
stories.
first anger holding you back story? I hope it's not a lifelong endeavor like mine was for those times.
No, I have a pretty specific one. So, I had a crush on someone from the time that I was like 13 until like 19 or something like that. First high school crush. Um, it happened like I wasn't that interested in him until I witnessed my mom getting physically assaulted by her boyfriend, and then that triggered like a need to escape, and so I escaped through my crush with this person. So I was kind of like obsessed with him in a way, but I avoided that. Like people said, "Do you like him?" And I was just like, "No." What are you talking about? Because I didn't really, at the end of the day, like I didn't really see him as a real person. It was like a object of my affection. It was
It's just like
whatever.
you said, a means of escape. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. But anyways, so this guy was known for rejecting women and then wanting to have sex with them afterwards. It was like a power thing. So anyways, I was like I think 18, 19. And then I finally like I had denied that I liked him. He had played around with me so much in high school. I felt so embarrassed. I just like denied ever liking him. I decided that I wanted to like be brave and like tell him how I felt. And so we were at a friend's house. Everyone went to bed, and it was just me and him in the living room. And then I told him, like, I don't even know. Did I say I was in love with him? I said something like, "Oh, I've liked you or loved you since I was 13." Blah 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 blah. It was like pouring my heart out. And then he said, "Oh, like I want to be friends, blah, blah, blah. Also, do you want to make out?" And so then we made out. And then the next morning, the friends dropped me off at school, which is university. I felt like everything was normal. Like I didn't like register anything wrong. I felt embarrassed, but whatever. And then so I just like remember sitting at the library with my chai latte and looking at the screen, and suddenly just this anger like flushed over me, and I was like, "Wait, what the fuck just happened?" And and then I realized what he had done, and I was infuriated. And that anger felt so powerful to me. Like it felt like I had power. And so what I did was I would think about it and ruminate on it. I remember like being in class, being like, oh, I don't feel angry, better go think about him, or be angry about that other guy who like doesn't like me, or be angry about this thing. And just keep myself in that loop, because I was afraid that if I stopped being angry, then something terrible was going to happen, which is essentially probably going to be like shame or, you know, whatever. And I just wasn't, I wasn't ready to feel that. And that anger kind of created this shell around me where I felt like I was better than people. I felt like I didn't have to really connect to anyone. And that type of anger has happened in multiple areas throughout my life, where I felt like I needed to hold on to it in order to keep my power, in order for people to not take advantage of me. But then it just, and then I ended up like creating all of these rules around like dating and, you know, whatever, which landed me in my first very abusive relationship. Because I had all these rules around like, oh, he needs to like dote on me all the time, and I need to, you know, it's like the exact opposite of like what happened. And so I ended up, the guy who I ended up dating was like super love bomby and super, you know, whatever. And I was like, yeah, check all the boxes.
Right.
Like,
And then he could just manipulate you that way instead.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then, so that is my first anger story.
Well, and that's why love is so incredibly powerful, right? Is that so if we look at sort of the spectrum of emotion, the same as we would look at like the color spectrum, where everything has its own frequency, right? The predominant sort of wavelength happening in the general consciousness in humanity is slower than anger, right? So that makes sense why then when people get really angry, and that's like what you just described, where you got angry and it felt more powerful, right?
Yeah.
Because you're moving up that spectrum, or, you know, faster in that spectrum,
like
so
intensity.
to speak. Exactly. Yeah. Than what the sort of general soup that we're in is, right? And then once you're in there, that's why you, like what you described a minute ago, of you felt like you were better than people and separating from people. Mm-hmm. The next thing along the spectrum from anger is then pride, right? So you got a little prideful and
Oh, yeah.
and then, but once you're willing to expand even further than that, that's when you can start moving into things like, you know, love and acceptance and peace and joy and things like that. But yeah, meanwhile, it takes the willingness to go past that, right? Mm-hmm. To, instead of, like you said, hanging on to that because it temporarily feels more powerful.
Yeah, it felt like a protection, and it also connected me to my father in a way, because he was super, super, super prideful. And so we were kind of, there was a moment in time where we were actually aligned.
Yeah.
In like energetically. And I was just like, meh, 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 meh. And he was like, meh, 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 meh. And so that was kind of like a little bit of my access there, but it was also, I also remember it being very exhausting.
It is.
Well, I needed to maintain it.
Have to, exactly.
Like burning out fuel.
Exactly. It's the having to maintain it, right? And I get what you're saying, because that was sort of like the family tradition that I was raised in too, right? Like there was a lot of sitting around talking about how nobody else knew what they were doing. Nobody else knew what they were talking about. Nobody, whatever. And even I thought of this, it popped back into my attention the other day, the idea that that somebody who's blissfully happy must just be really stupid.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we got that. Yeah,
Right?
sure.
And
For
I was
sure.
like, wow, I'm so glad that I was willing to like leave that behind and be
Mm,
as intelligent as I am and deliriously happy and incredibly
mhm.
easily amused and
Yep.
and
Yeah.
have access to as much delight and joy as I feel like anytime.
Mhm.
And I haven't lost anything other than what you mentioned before, holding on to that idea of like some kind of false superiority.
Yeah, it's like that mindset brought me deeper into people that I wasn't aligned with, into the kinds of things that I don't really want to be talking about, that kind of like headspace that feels kind of like a whirlpool, wind tunnel, like a going deeper into this hole that you don't really want to be in, but it feels like there's some connection there. It's like, remember,
Because in order to reject something, to reject it, especially with any intensity, you're now actually locked into a relationship with it.
mm,
Right? So in order to expend energy on like, oh, you know what I think is so stupid, you've now bonded yourself to that,
mhm,
right? Whereas if when you're existing in like in a place of peace, in a place of love, in a place of this harmonious flow, anything that's not your cup of tea just isn't your cup of tea, and it doesn't have any like, oh, what's the expression? It's not living in your head rent free, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Totally, totally. Um, I mean, although I think there is value if you're like, um, it is value of bitching about things sometimes. I definitely do believe that. And I think with where I was, it was kind of like when I had a coworker and we would just sit there and like bitch about our other coworkers. And it wasn't a vulnerable experience. It was you know, we're like saying anything nice would be like weird.
Yeah.
Okay, so give me a story. Tell me a story about anger that transformed or whatever into something expansive for you.
So here's another place where I have a lot of them, but in every case, the
Give me one.
anger,
Just give me one.
yeah, exactly. The anger itself didn't bring the expansiveness, right? The anger itself brought me um, to the degree that I was willing to let the anger move, and to the degree I was willing to recognize the love that already exists at the center of the anger, then from that place of love there was expansiveness, right? um and a lot of those, I don't have one in particular coming to my mind right now, but I can tell you this: they would all mm,
I could go
okay. So,
first and then you can come up with one.
well, you know what, I want to say it in terms of that, especially when it comes to like standing up for yourself,
Mhm.
right? There, I feel just kind of a flurry of things where that I'm just not nailing down one particular memory, but it goes like this. It goes where, because this is from so many years ago, right? Where I would wait until I would get angry enough to then be willing to like straighten something out, right? Like
Mm,
something that was off balance, something that was out of harmony, something where people were stepping over lines that they didn't need to be stepping over, right? Then there would first be me getting angry enough and then letting that move on. And then from there, then it would be easy and clear to be like, okay, this, right?
yeah.
So yeah, tell yours, because maybe that'll like
I
spark
think,
something
yeah,
more
it'll spark
specific
some
for
things.
me.
Yeah. I have a couple things. So, the one that I'll share what would be when I first started my business. my coaching business, the first year. And I was doing a lot of consults, getting a lot of no's, posting a lot, not getting the results I want. I was in debt, and in debt without having the knowledge. Hi, baby. My cat.
Oh, yay.
Yeah, he's wanting his attention. It's almost, well, it's not even almost dinner time. Yeah. I didn't have the knowledge then that I could make money. I could make $10,000, $20,000, $40,000 in a month, right? I didn't have that knowledge. It was kind of like that, oh, we don't know if this is going to work. Maybe we just gave, $40,000 plus to people who are just scamming me, and we don't know. So there was that, and there was also like I was in a relationship with a narcissist who would like make fun of me and my posts and me being a coach and all that. And the people that I was having consults with were people who I knew in the community, and it was really embarrassing. And I was doing consults really badly and everything. So I was feeling just a lot of shame, and I was repressing my anger a lot, in my resentment towards people and all of that. Then in June, George Floyd was murdered. And that actually, a couple days before it happened, I'm not a person who watches the news or follows the news. Anything I find out from like other people, and they're like, it's been on the news for months. And I'm like, I don't know. So a couple days before.
But don't you notice we always find out what we need to find out?
Exactly. A couple of days before I found out, I started having these like reoccurring dreams about the person who used to call me an N-word in high school, and she was my best friend. And so I was having those dreams, but I didn't know what to do with the anger or anything. It was just, those feelings would always come at night, and I would just have a lot of adrenaline and whatever. But then I started seeing the riots and all of that stuff, and people were starting to talk about race. And that's when I had this moment where I was like, I've done enough. Like, I've done enough marketing. I've done enough selling. I've tried enough. It's time for me to get paid. Like, where is my money? And it was that event allowed all of the anger that I had been feeling to be okay. And there was space now for me to talk about my experience and to have people be more receptive and not as, dismissive or ignoring it or whatever. Like, people were ready to hear me. And so then I started to like tell more of my story, and then show up with a little bit more of it's not really giving a fuck anymore, and saying what's really on my mind and whatever. And then that's when I had my first 10K month. And then I just kept having 10K months, and then I ended up increasing, and then I ended up building a multiple six-figure business. And that was the catalyst. And that was a very, very, very powerful thing. Was not necessarily the anger itself, but the fact that the anger was okay, and there was space available to witness it with love.
Exactly. And what happens there, and again, I've seen this so many times over the years, that it takes because anger does have more oomph to it, right, than a lot of other things. It takes an incredible amount of energy to keep the anger suppressed. Yeah. Right. So your energy was divided as long as that was, you were trying to maintain that place of keeping the anger suppressed. So then once it sort of couldn't be denied, couldn't be ignored by, like you said, the catalyst of this, event that obviously got a lot of people angry, right? It rippled through. It was a big turning point,
Yeah.
then your openness to all of your anger, like you said, the anger from that specifically, and just sort of what it brought with it, right, of your previous suppressed anger, put you into a whole different state of openness.
Yeah, totally.
And you saw that reflected very quickly, it sounds like.
Yeah. And it's interesting just talking about this now. It's like I held on to my anger about the boys, even though I'm not even straight, but whatever. Like hanging on to my anger about that, but then resisting that kind of deeper anger, because it's almost like and I made a post about, focusing on people that I'm infatuated with is easier than the truth of my pain. And so it was kind of like a similar situation where it's like, oh, this anger is okay. I'm like, it feels more okay to be angry at this boy than it is to be angry at like systematic oppression, because I don't, wow, what am I going to do with that? Right. That's not like a thing that can be solved. Right.
Right.
So yeah, so that's really interesting. Did
Yeah,
you
go ahead.
I was gonna say, did you end up coming up with an example?
Well, I've just been with what you were saying,
Yeah.
and I have to say I very much relate to what you're saying about that pattern in youth of just putting this sort of obsession on another person in order to escape
Yeah.
what you're actually dealing with and the pain you're feeling. Because that was 100% my pattern when I was very young. Like I went, like I was always in the midst of something, right? I would go from one thing to another. I would be like super melodramatic about it, right? Like I can remember being, I don't know, maybe like 15 or something, and something with a guy had ended or whatever, and having, this was in the days of like a tape deck with headphones, right? And just like playing some kind of like sappy, everything is lost, everything is over, kind of song, just on repeat. Well, or the best we could do for repeat in those days, which was like rewind, flip it over,
Yeah.
And in order to just, like you said, stay with that feeling, and as a way to avoid the rest of what I was feeling. And so for that reason, there was a point, like, I guess in my 30s, where I then intentionally was like, okay, what if I don't engage in this at all, right? Not in the so much of like an avoiding people, but like, am I comfortable? I want to show myself whether I'm actually comfortable to be with me on my own completely, right?
Yeah.
And that was a real game changer as well.
Totally. Except for your husband, your upcoming husband in Canto.
Oh my
He's in the water somewhere swimming.
My magical dolphin man, exactly.
So I have been looking at like mythical creatures books from the library. They're like children's nonfiction stuff, because I want to paint dragons. And so I was looking at this book, and then there was this like dolphin god thing, and Rebecca loves dolphins, but this dolphin in particular turns into a handsome man, I think at night or something. So he's like perfect. Like he can like leave you alone during the day, and then he can just like appear as like a handsome man at night and go back to the ocean.
Listen, if you knew the way I howled laughing when I opened up my messages and you had sent me that, I was like, oh my God, this is too much.
I'm like, this is perfect. And he also has magical powers, so that's like,
I know, what's not
right.
to love? What's not to love? I cannot imagine that a magical dolphin man would even bat an eye at, me sort of mysteriously attracting all sorts of animals to me, like black cats and crows and things like that, to be friends with. That wouldn't even seem unusual or
No,
spooky to
not at
him at
all. I know, that's what I'm saying. Like, literally perfect. Cool. So do you have any other examples of anger that held you back?
Anger that held me back. Well, like I said, I mean, it was just so, it was a sort of like a constant way of being that held me
Mm,
back for so many
right.
years, right? Because I was just living in that. I was living trapped in that cycle of suppressing it until it exploded, suppressing it until it exploded, right? So it was
Yeah.
like just a day-to-day life situation. And I so appreciated what you mentioned earlier about that when you shift that relationship with your emotions, that it's not something that you have to separately, like, carve out time and sit down with a workbook or with a process or whatever.
Yeah.
And to me, that's what's so incredibly meaningful, is how things are showing up in our day-to-day lives, right? And how that is integrated.
Yeah.
Because I, years and years ago, had started, I mean, it's something that's gone on for a lot of years, but there was in particular an incident where, in front of a lot of other people, I was experiencing things that, lots of people think are impossible. We'll just put it that way, right? In terms of like what people think of as spiritual abilities or samadhi type things, that along that lines, right? But in the midst of this moment, I was, long story short, I was in one place and I was asked to look at what was going on in my house, which was states away, right? And in that moment, and even after that, when people for like years would ask me about it, I really couldn't have cared less about that happened, right?
Wait,
What
what happened?
that I was able to, whatever you want to call it, I was in one place and I knew what was happening in my house somewhere else, right?
Oh, okay, cool.
So, and I was able to be in both places, like, because I went into my house
Mm,
as well and like turned off a light and things like that. Stuff that I had never done before and hadn't tried to do before because I didn't really care. Because what made a difference to me in that moment, because when I was in both places and I saw what was happening in my living room at home, there was a mess and everybody had gone to bed and left this mess in the living room. And the miracle for me in that moment was not that I knew that or could see that or was present to that. The miracle to me in that moment was that I didn't go into a rage about it. The miracle to
mm,
me was that right, because that's really what matters. That's something that's actually what bothered me in my life before that moment, was how
mm,
uncomfortable I felt so often. It didn't bother me before in my life of like, ooh, I can't, you know, be in two places at once or see what's happening in other places. Like, who even thinks to be bothered about that? Who cares? So, and like I said, over the years, there's a laundry list of things that I promise you people would say is impossible, or certain people would
mm,
say is impossible, that I've experienced. But what really matters to me that I've experienced is being able to experience love or experience peace in the middle of whatever the stuff that used to bother me, in the middle of traffic jams or changes of plans or stuff like that. Because when I tell you I used to be wound tight when I was your age and younger,
mhm.
I was wound tight. I couldn't let my food touch on the plate. Okay.
Yeah.
I was at Thanksgiving, you knew where I was sitting because there were like 5 little plates instead of a normal plate, right?
I
So,
want to send you this show. I think it's on Amazon Prime, and it's like about someone who has those kinds of abilities, and it's like um it's animated, so it actually has that kind of like magical
oh, cool.
multi-timeline kind of thing. So I'm going to send that to you. I don't know what
Okay,
it's called though.
cool. Yeah, because I see people put so much focus on like hoping for those kind of things or prioritizing trying to experience those kind of things. And I'm like, I mean, like, if that kind of stuff happens to you, fine, let that happen to you. but you can't ever make it the priority, right? The priority has to
You're not
be
a better person or like a more
exactly.
worthy person for having those experiences.
Exactly. The priority has to be on, am I able to live human life?
Yeah.
Because that's what you're stuck with, not stuck with, but that's what we're here doing, right? So
Mhm.
that's what really matters.
Yeah. So there's one thing that I want to leave everybody with, to be able to access anger, stop repressing anger for whatever is going on. This is something that I did with my client not too long ago. Is first acknowledging that something happened to you. They did this. They abused me. They, they gaslit me. I was gaslit. Like acknowledging what happened to you and letting the emotions, whatever it is, whether it's anger or shame or sadness, letting them come up. I think when you are actually in the processing of anger, embracing it and you're also allowing it to move. It shifts from like anger to then sadness to then, whatever order it is, right? But if you are a person who tends to hold down anger, that's a good place to start. And also to notice when you are starting to acknowledge that anger, or even just being like, oh, I am angry at this person. To notice when your brain is like, oh, I can't be angry at them because blah, blah, blah. And you start feeling guilt, or you're like, oh, well, that will make me, dangerous, or it'll make me whatever. That's a good sign that you're on the right track.
Yeah.
Is yeah.
Yeah, so that point that you just mentioned of identity, right? Of like I should or shouldn't feel whatever because it makes me whatever, right? Or it
Yeah.
means whatever about me. There's a core process that everyone can grab on my, if you go to my links, it's going to be where it says join love notes. And it's a process called shift into peace that includes that. And you get it in a, like you get a PDF reference, but also a video and an audio that guide you through actually doing it. And it's really powerful when you bring, like you said, you give that space for the emotions to move, and then also notice where there's something going on about identity, because that's going to bring you to a really big root for sure.
Yeah, no, that's really great. Yeah, well, that's in Rebecca's bio link,
Yeah,
and you'll
exactly.
find
So
it
if you go to my
on
bio link, and if you
her
go
website.
to join love notes, it's going to give you something that says shift into peace and tell you about the process, and then you get it instantly. We can throw, as far as like, if you're seeing this on Facebook, we can throw the link in the comments too.
Yeah, exactly. All right, my friend. I think it's a good place to leave.
All
leave off.
right, sounds good. Yeah, it's funny that, and I think this is going to help people with some of the misconceptions, right, about anger, that
Mhm.
it's not something that has to be either hidden away um or like, or that you succumb to it, right? Because we've had this whole conversation all about anger, diving into, you know, um so many things about anger, and it's been a good time.
Totally. One
We
thing
didn't.
I will say
Yeah.
actually, is that I've been reading about TMS. I don't know what exactly the words are, but it's a syndrome that Dr. John Sarno studies. And so basically, what John Sarno argues and proposes is that, pain in your back and pain, like different pains in your body, are actually your body resisting emotions like anger or anxiety, because those are the top emotions that we resist. And the reason why it ends up showing up in our physical body is because physical pain is more socially acceptable than emotional pain. If you are sick, like you broke your leg, people are gonna be like, oh, blah, blah, blah. But if you're like, oh, I'm feeling sad, blah, 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 you're not getting the same amount of like investment.
100%.
In,
Yeah, right. Nobody is inclined to come to your aid necessarily when you just say that you're
Unless you're like friends with
rejecting a
people who
lot
have
of
cancer,
fear and
Mhm.
rejecting a lot of anger,
Mhm.
and I think I think he's onto something there. I think that's probably part of it. And
Yep.
at the same time, it also, whatever's going on with you in your energy system definitely shows up through your physical body, right?
Totally.
So to the degree that you have all of this suppressed, rejected energy, that's for sure you're having to carry that, and that can show up as physical pain.
Totally.
And in terms of the other thing you said of us being conditioned that we're going to get sympathy like that, I completely agree. And I remember from the time my kids were very little, I sat them down and told them, because I didn't want them to subconsciously get into that pattern of getting sick in order to get love when what you really need is love, right? And so we had a little system that we set up where we called it a TLC day. And I told them, anytime you want, if you feel like you need that, if you want to lay on the sofa and have a little bell and have me bring you whatever you need, you just say so. Just say so. Just be like, Mom, it's time for a TLC day. And that's what we would do. And they would stay home and be on the sofa, and like all the things that, like you said, we end up associating with getting the care and love that we need through illness, and
So good.
doing that directly instead of having to have the illness.
Exactly. Yeah. So what I do when I am like starting to get shoulder pain or pain in my hip or knee or whatever, one thing that I've been practicing is like what anger am I resisting right now? What anxiety am I resisting right now? And something always comes up. And it's amazing what happens is when I start to feel that, then the physical pain goes away. The more that you learn about how it actually works in your body, the more it works. So definitely encourage you to check that out as well if you suffer from chronic pain, because it's really changed my life as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's
Mhm.
fantastic. And those are, like you said, those really are the two biggies of our anger and fear that, people deal with so continuously, but are so inclined to reject so frequently. Yeah.
All right. my
Good.
friends.
Sounds good. This was a great conversation. I so enjoyed it.
All right, guys. Well, we'll talk to you next time.